Right now, we're waiting for the streams to load on the multiple different platforms on which we multi-stream. We stream on Facebook, on Periscope, on Twitter, and of course, on YouTube. And it looks like we are online on all three. Greetings, hello, and welcome. My name is Robert Gruler. I am a criminal defense attorney. I am somebody who practices law representing people who are charged with crimes. The show that you're watching here today is called Watching the Watchers Live. What we do on this show is we hold police officers, prosecutors, judges, politicians, anybody who's involved in the criminal justice system, we hold them accountable. We want to highlight the misconduct so that we can see some meaningful criminal justice reform. We've been, of course, doing this for a long time, and now it is becoming more and more of a topic, which is a good thing. We want to see this conversation continue forward. And so today on the show, we're going to be talking about some more criminal justice issues. We're going to be talking specifically about James Garcia. We've got some local issues we're going to talk about, and we've got some national and international issues that we are going to discuss today. James Garcia, it's been another week, and we have another police shooting that resulted in somebody being killed. His name is James Garcia, of course, and this story happened in Phoenix. It happened on July 4th. We're going to talk to you about that. We've got some body camera footage. We've got some statements from Jeri William, the Phoenix chief of police. And so there's a lot surrounding that story that we want to dissect because we're starting to see some movement. We're starting to see some meaningful reforms take place as it relates to how the police are handling these situations. And of course, I want to tell you what those are. Now, that's local news. Internationally, of course, we have the federal indictment of Ghislaine Maxwell. So she was Jeffrey Epstein's right-hand person. She got indicted last week. I think it was on Wednesday, right after this show ended. I think I saw that her indictment came through. And so she has been arrested. She's been transported from her life of luxury now into a federal prison. And so we're going to discuss what that looks like. I've got a copy of the indictment. I want to run through that so you can see what the government is actually alleging, what they're claiming took place, what happened. A lot of this stuff is pretty interesting because it took place a long time ago, about something like 20 years ago. And there's going to be some interesting defenses that surround that. So Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, for a long time, they've been working with an attorney, Alan Dershowitz, who's kind of the most renowned criminal defense lawyer in our country and maybe even the world, somebody who's worked on a lot of high-profile cases. He responded to these charges. Of course, he's not going to be on the show, but we do have some statements that he has made. He wrote a letter in The Spectator, and we're going to dissect that a little bit. And so we've got a lot to get to today. Let's go ahead and dive in. Before we do that, let me just make sure that my audio levels are looking good. Let me check on the chat to make sure that we've got some people who can leave some comments as I'm going through the show. If you see anything that you want to comment on, please feel free to do that. Of course, I always like to answer some of the comments as we're going through the show. So drop some of those comments, and then I will pull those up as the show progresses. So first and foremost, as I mentioned, let's talk about James Garcia. James Garcia was shot and killed. He was 28 years old, and he was shot and killed in a parked car on the 4th of July. You can see here we have his photograph right there, and he's got some kids. He's got a family. And so this is kind of another story, and it's a sad thing every week when we have to come on and talk about another shooting. You would think that, sort of in this time of extremely heightened scrutiny that there would be actually less of these, but to me it just feels sort of anecdotally, I don't have any data to support this, that we're seeing more and more of these. These are becoming almost more common, and in a way that makes sense because you've got people who are on very high alert. There's a lot of tension that is prevalent in our society. Police are concerned that they're under attack by the Black Lives Matter movement and the Defund the Police movement and all of these sort of different segments and different groups that are boiling up throughout society. So they feel like they're threatened. Of course, on the flip side, we as a society, people who are, just everyday average citizens, we've got our own concerns about the police, and we've got our own concern about safety, especially as it relates to encounters with law enforcement. And so, a lot of people are very tense on the other side. Every time that there's an interaction with the police, as we're going to see with James Garcia's case, things can get heated. They can get escalated. It can escalate very quickly. And, that may be what happened here. So Let's dive into it. Let's talk about the actual story. So here's what happened. Here's James Garcia. Cops were responding to a 911 caller who had said that this person, the 911 caller had said that very recently a man had attempted to stab him, and he was identifying that man. So on a separate occasion, the 911 caller allegedly was somebody attempted to stab him. And the caller called 911, and the allegation is that James Garcia was that person. And there's some conflicting reports about that. Did the 911 caller call and report an actual stabbing, and did the police respond and find the right guy? So in other words, was James Garcia the guy who the 911 caller is claiming stabbed him a week previously? And so there's some conflicting evidence about that. I looked into it. Miss Faith looked into it, and there's sort of, it's a gray area. There's not a lot of clear data on that yet. On the one side, it could be that the police found the right guy, that the 911 caller was right, and that there was a prior altercation with Mr. Garcia. On the flip side, it could have been just that James Garcia was seated in a parked car outside of his friend's house waiting to go out. Police rolled up on him. They found the wrong guy because of sort of what's going on in our world, because of these heightened tensions. The situation got out of control. It got escalated. He didn't want to respond to the police, so he had a gun. Police saw the gun. They shot and basically killed him. Yeah, we've got a lot of video today. Typically, I don't like to play much of the video, but these videos are pretty benign. We have one from a body camera from an officer who rolls up after the scene, and then we have some from some civilians who were not part of law enforcement, but they are recording it. But again, they're far off, so we're not seeing sort of the same gruesome thing that we saw on with George Floyd. Now, it doesn't make it any less difficult for the family or for James. Obviously, somebody was shot and killed in this. But what we want to do is analyze how the police responded, and then also analyze how are they responding to their response. What are they doing? We're seeing a lot of discussions about policy changes, and Jeri Williams is addressing some of those. I've got some positive things to say about it, and of course some negative things to say about it. So when the cops came upon James Garcia's case, they noticed that he had an armed handgun basically in his lap. They didn't know if there was any connection between him and the 911 caller, but after the fact, it has come out that it sounds like he was just sitting outside of his friend's house waiting to go out. When the cops showed up, they explained to him that they were investigating an aggravated assault, which would have been, of course, that alleged knife stabbing that the 911 caller made previously. They told him to get out of the car, which you need to do if you're under investigation in Arizona. It's for officer safety, so you get out of the car. They can make sure you don't have any weapons on you or anything like that. So just at that outset, he's being a little bit combative with them. It certainly doesn't require somebody shooting and killing you for that, but apparently there's some missing information here. Cops are saying he pulled out a gun. He may have already had a gun. It's going to be very curious to see exactly what happened. The body camera footage doesn't show us what happened inside the vehicle, so we're going to get there. But that's the backdrop. So the police get a call. They claim the 911 caller claims there's a guy who stabbed him previously is sitting in a car. Cops roll up. He doesn't get out of the car. They see a gun. Boom, 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 boom. They fire a bunch of shots through the window of the car. He never even leaves. And then we will roll up into some body camera footage that the police actually did release. So just a quick synopsis on what that looks like. He was sitting in a parked car. The cops surrounded him, and then they had the guns pointed directly at them. So witnesses were yelling at the cops, "Please lower your weapons." One officer shouted, "Stop moving, I will effing shoot you." Then gunshots can be heard. He was taken to the hospital and pronounced dead. And then, last night, of course, today's Wednesday, on Tuesday last night, there were a bunch more protesters outside of our governor's house, Governor Ducey, to protest the killing. And they have, I think, a lot of valid claims, and we're going to dissect sort of what the Phoenix police response has been. And so let's take a look at actually some body camera footage. So we have this was released. So this video footage comes from the Phoenix police. They released a statement after James was shot and killed, which by the way, once you see it, he's basically dead on arrival. There's no way he's going to survive that. They fired a ton of bullets right directly at him, right through the window of the car. So it's very, very, very difficult to survive that. So Here is the body camera footage after he was shot. So this is an officer who is rolling up on the scene after this had all gone down. Let's take a look.
Hey, boss!
Guns are
Where's
already
the gun
drawn.
It's in his lap. He just let go of it. Can we retrieve the gun and get him out and get him to fire? Hey, let me glove up. Let me glove up.
So if you just count, just keep notice of how many cops are in this video. We've got the one,
you have a
two,
rifle
three,
across the street
four.
on that Tahoe now.
Yeah, I got my rifle over there.
You've got a dash cam probably
Where's
in the
the gun?
vehicle of
Good
that
right
police
his
Tahoe
lap.
sitting right in front of the car.
Watch crosswalk.
And he's clearly
Gun is
dead.
secure.
They did pull out a gun. And that's what we have got. So that is essentially what the police department released. And they did release it fairly quickly, actually. This happened on July 4th. And what was very interesting about, we're seeing some modifications in the Phoenix Police Department's response to how they're handling these situations. So on the face of it, what they have produced is very good. Within the first 48 hours of this shooting taking place, they had a public relations video that was assembled and ready to go. And so I want to show you clips and bits and pieces from it. It's about 2:55, but just keep in mind that we've already clipped out really the most important part of what you're about to see. We just showed that to you. The video of the officer rolling up after everything had already happened, that is the body camera that they have released. I counted the 4 other officers who were there that we saw from that one video. There's probably another 6 or 7 of them who you saw all the different police cars. A ton of people responded, but we can count about 4 maybe that were involved or were at least by the car when the shooting took place. You saw that the cop who was responding, the body camera that we see attached on his chest, he was running up after the fact, but there were 4 guys who were already there. So presumably there is at least one of them should have been wearing body camera, you would imagine, or there was a vehicle, a dash cam recording in the vehicle of the Tahoe that was facing Mr. Garcia's vehicle. So there should be a lot more material than what we're getting. But what I clipped for you is really the highlight. I mean, that's it. So it was about, what was that, 30 seconds? 35 seconds? Not a lot. Well, the police put out a statement, the Phoenix police did. They put out a statement, basically. It's a video. They put this on Instagram, and they posted it in a number of different places. And you'll see what they do. They bring in their public relations person who is a person of color, who is a minority, who is going to come through and speak about what we sort of are about to see. So they go in and they detail all of the situation. They say what happened. They play the 911 call, just a clip of it. And they're claiming that, that this was essentially all justified. And of course, what is the video that they show us? It's the video of him pulling a gun out of the vehicle. So let's just scrub around through this and listen to a little bit of the Phoenix PD's public statement that they released recently on Instagram.
I'm Sergeant Mercedes Fortune with an update on a critical incident in our community of an officer-involved shooting which happened Saturday afternoon near the area of 56th Avenue in Glen Rosa. There is high interest in the case with social media posts which include misinformation about the facts that led up to the shooting. The purpose of this video is to provide those facts and body-worn video currently available for release. The investigation into the shooting is still in the early stages. Releasing body-worn camera footage from the officers directly involved before all witnesses and officer interviews are completed would compromise the investigation.
Yeah, so that's what they say, that it's going to compromise the investigation, and I want you to pay close attention to that. So the body camera that's available, they're going to use that word because we're going to talk about how the Phoenix police, how they're changing their policy about body camera footage being released, but they're going to use that word that's available. So just keep that in mind. She just said that we're going to release what we can that's available.
However, there is body-worn camera video from an officer who was not involved in the shooting, but assisted on the scene, which we are sharing with you. Officers first responded to this area because a man called 911.
All right, so you can see basically what she's doing. She's going to walk you through this, and she's walking you through the same thing I already told you. They're responding. Somebody called the police. They show up. the rest of it is basically that they show you the little clip that I've already showed you, and then they say that they're committed to transparency and that they're gonna continue their investigation. In other words, there's a lot of other officers who were there. They are going to continue their investigation. So a couple points on that. Number one, I do think that it is very, very positive that the Phoenix Police Department is at least thinking about these things. They're thinking about, hey, when we shoot somebody, it's probably going to cause a lot of repercussions now, and we're going to need to address this with the public. So the idea that they're being cognizant of this is obviously good. I think a lot of departments are still being pretty tone deaf about some of these things. They're hearing a lot of the criticism, but they're not commenting on it, or they're not making any publicly perceptible changes on the back end regarding to, related to their policies. They're just sort of flying under the radar. The Phoenix Police Department, to their credit, they're doing a good job of actually trying to get in front of these things. So as you can see here from that video and from that little piece, what they're trying to do is get ahead of it, right? So if they would just kind of sweep this stuff under the rug, well, somebody from the news, a journalist, a reporter, somebody's going to get the footage. It's going to leak out and it's going to explode. And so, when you're going through, I was a political science undergraduate before I went to law school, and in a political science elections class or whatever it is, I took something, and one of the biggest lessons was get ahead of it. If you're running for office, if you are in public office, if you are, in a position like law enforcement is, you want to get ahead of the bad news before the news gets it. And so that's really what the police are doing here. They're saying, look, we know that there was an officer-involved shooting. We know it resulted in a death, but listen to our side of the story first before you jump to conclusions. Here's what we think happened. And so they put together this, this little story, this little explanation of what they did. And there's a lot of evidence that still should come out in this case that we have not seen yet, and I'm going to get there. So I'm not jumping to conclusions and saying that this person was wrongfully killed or not. There is a lot more that I think still needs to come out, and this situation is certainly different than some of the other stories that we've already talked about on this show, right? Let's compare it to the George Floyd case. Okay, in this situation, there's some critical evidence that's missing. We don't know if James Garcia did pull out his gun, if he did point it at somebody. There is a thing called suicide by cop. That could have happened. I'm not saying that it did, but it is hypothetical. It is a possibility. And if you're a regular of the show, you know how I'm inclined, whether I'm going to, typically give the officers the benefit of the doubt. Ordinarily, I would not, because I've seen so many of these things, and that's kind of the point of this show. But we still don't know. This one is still too close to call because there's a lot of evidence missing. Evidence that I think exists, whether it's from the dash cam footage on that Tahoe that was in front of his car that you can see right there. I mean, there's a police vehicle pointed right at his car. So can we see what that was recording, or was it equipped? There are other officers right around there. So we want to know what else is out there before we can really draw a cognitive, definitive solution on this thing. Whereas with George Floyd, it was pretty obvious, right? He was in handcuffs. Cop was on his neck for 9 minutes. Breonna Taylor, she was home asleep. Some lunatic cop fired 10 rounds through the window that he couldn't even see through and killed her. You don't really need to investigate much more of that. And so this is I think significantly different. It could come back that it was justified. It could come back totally unjustified. There's just not enough there yet on that issue. Now, the police may have had the wrong person entirely. I mentioned that at the outset of the show. There's kind of a lot of gray area there about whether they had the right guy or not, whether the 911 caller actually gave them, the information about this one particular person who apparently stabbed him, a week preceding. So this one's kind of up in the air right now based on these facts, but let's take a look at some other things. Let's take a look at this video footage from a bystander. So this happens before the shooting took place. Not a great video because the cameraman is certainly probably riddled with anxiety, having all these police in his neighborhood and having cops, have their guns drawn on somebody, and especially in light of everything that's going on. But we can draw some conclusions from it. So let's take a look.
Put the gun down, motherfucker! Bro, don't shoot him. Put it down!
Content warning.
I am recording it.
Bro, don't shoot him! I can fucking shoot you! Don't shoot him! That's fucked up! That's fucked up, man! That's fucked up, bro! What the fuck, man?
Hey! Hey, homie! Hey!
That's fucked up, dog! That's fucked up, man! What the fuck? I'm ready to shoot the fuck, man! Fucked up, bro!
Then we see
Shit,
another
man!
officer run on scene.
Back the fuck off! It's fucking dead, bro! Look at you fucking smoking his ass already, man!
Yeah, so that officer also comes running up, but you can see that there were other officers who were right on top of him. I mean, right there. It's almost, execution style. You have basically no chance if you're sitting there and you've got multiple cops. You just have their guns pointed on you. So, again, it doesn't look good. It doesn't look like, we can't see anything that would make you obviously go, well, the police were clearly justified there. In the Rayshard Brooks case, right, we had the taser. Rayshard Brooks was running away, and he pulled his taser, he pulled a taser out that had already been spent and kind of flailed it back in the other direction, but he was clearly running away, and he was shot in the back. So that is clearly wrong. I mean, that was my conclusion a couple weeks ago, right? Clearly wrong. You can't shoot a drunk guy who's running away in the back. This situation's a little bit different. We did see that the cop who came upon the scene after the fact, he did pull a weapon out. Nothing illegal about that. You're allowed to have a weapon. You can have a concealed carry weapons permit. You don't even need one in Arizona. You can just have a weapon. We have very, very not strict gun laws here, much to my great satisfaction. But it's something where he did have a gun. And so if he would have picked that gun up and just gone like this, or when he has it in his lap, if he just picks it up and points it at an officer, there's really good justification for that at that point in time. And so we don't know yet. But what we're seeing here, there's still room for a determination to be made. And the problem with this is that we're missing a lot that I think otherwise should be released. But we're going to get there. So let's see how the Phoenix police, law enforcement, and specifically Jeri Williams, how they're handling this case. So first of all, they are asking for the FBI's assistance with an independent review. So what you can see here, that's Chief Jeri William. She said, "I am taking this step in the best interest of my employees, my department, and the city. I recognize this is a time of community distrust. I hope this step will allow our community to feel confident in the findings." So they are going to be bringing in the FBI to help with the shooting. She released a more kind of comprehensive statement about their body camera footage. And so this is where we're still in a window where we can still continue to investigate. I'm open. I'm comfortable giving this window because there's been some really, I would say, forward-thinking progress or some good changes that are coming out of the Phoenix Police Department. So here is her public statement. Jeri Williams has a public statement that she released yesterday at about 3:30 p.m. So she says, increasing the transparency efforts to be more proactive in releasing videos. That's something that they're trying to do. They want to seek support from outside agencies to assist in conducting investigations into some of these incidents. And so today she's announcing that the FBI conduct their independent civil rights review on the shooting, but also that they're going to do an internal investigation. So homicide's going to conduct a criminal investigation. The FBI is going to conduct their independent civil rights investigation. And hopefully she's going to see some good results from that. I'm not sure exactly what she's looking for, but she's trying to increase some transparency. The other big change, which is why, there's a little bit of leeway on this one, is she is changing their body camera footage policy. So you can see down here, she's saying the original goal last fall, so this was, I think, in Q4 last year, 2019, they were going to make the videos available within 45 days of the incident. Well, now what they're trying to do is release it within 10 to 14 days. So they're going down from 45 days, which was their ordinary timeline, which I think even then was questionable, to 10 to 14 days. So I like that. I like that they are trying to accelerate this process. Rather than sitting on it for so long, they're going to try to pick up the speed a little bit. They said it took us 45 days previously. We're going to try to do it in 10 to 14, which is great, right? We want this stuff sooner because, as I've said many times here, justice delayed is justice denied, and we do not want these things to sit for 45 days while these officers are still on the streets, and while the public has time to kind of cool down and forget about these things and let these things fly by the wayside. This man had a family, and their father's not around anymore. Or, I don't know if he's married, but he's not around anymore. And so they deserve justice. There's a clip on the news from his sister who's very upset. She's really, really upset about what happened, and rightfully so. And so we're going to see whether or not they can adhere to this policy. I like the idea that they're going to be releasing these things in 10 to 14 days. And with this specific case, let's hold them accountable to their own policy. So this happened on July 4th. So in 10 days, that's going to be on the 14th. So we've got 6 days from today to see if they release it. If they need the full 14 days, because this is a complicated case, let's see if it comes out on July 18th. If she's going to be changing her policy, let's make sure that we get all of that from all of those different officers, everything that was available, all the dash cam footage, all of the body cam footage, all of the full 911 calls, any witness statements, anything from when these things happen, officers will go around, they'll talk to all the witnesses, anybody standing by. Let's what did they have to say? What was going on with all of this stuff, and let's get it quickly. And if we don't have it all in 10 to 14 days, as Jeri Williams has stated that she will try to make available per her changed policy, well, then we can hold them accountable for that. But I do think 10 to 14 days is pretty reasonable. I mean, I obviously would like it immediately. I think all of this stuff should be basically public record, and we can just log on to a website. At least defense attorneys log on to a website and just pull up a body camera and monitor these people. And I'd be more inclined to support something like that. But if we're going to go from 45 days to 14, great. We're moving the right direction. We are directionally moving the ball forward. They're taking it seriously. They're putting together a public relations team. They're going to be communicating with us, the citizens. Jeri Williams has said that she's open to having these external agencies, these third-party agencies, these civilian agencies, and all of that take place with her department. And that's good, right? That we want more of that. We want the police to be listening to us and to be enacting reforms, which is why I kind of take issue with the defund the police movement. If we're telling Jeri Williams and the entire Phoenix Police Department that we are going to defund you and we're not going to work with you anymore, and we want you eliminated, and we want your whole department gone, every officer fired, and all of your infrastructure dismantled, which is very unlikely to happen, right? I mean, is that really going to happen? Probably not. So when we go at them and we're making those arguments, the negotiation is over. Why would they have any desire to work with us to improve their department if our only goal is to eliminate them? So my point is we want the good people to rise to the top. We want the good cops, the ones who can hear us, the ones with some fortitude, the ones with some strength to go through this process and say, we got to make some difficult changes. I know you don't want to give the body camera footage out, police union or all of these other, small factions within the law enforcement community. We know that you don't like this, but we have to do it. And it seems like Jeri Williams is making some pretty good progress, making some directionally, accurate improvements, which is a good thing. And so we want to commend her on that. That being said, it's her policy. She told us what the policy is going to be. All available body cameras are going to be released within 10 to 14 days. And so I mentioned that at the beginning when we were reviewing their little piece that they put out. They said that. So the policy is going to be all available body camera footage, or everything that's available. So we're going to see, I fully don't expect to get most of this stuff in the 10 to 14 day window. I would love to see it, but I'm going to guess that it doesn't come out. And the reason being is because they're going to say it's subject to continued investigation, further investigation. The FBI is involved. They've asked us not to release it, whatever. They're going to come up with a bunch of stuff, a bunch of rationale as to why they cannot release everything. And so that's where this policy, I think, is probably not going to change much of anything. They're going to release the selective clips that they want to release, the ones just like we saw today that I just played for you and that they put in their little piece. where we see what they want us to see. They see an officer running up after the fact and pulling a gun out of the car. So you go, oh, he had a gun. Clearly, he deserved to be shot and killed. That's the takeaway. And they do a pretty nice job of it. I mean, I make videos all the time on YouTube, so I kind of know how it's done. And I know what I saw. It looked good. And they were able to do it quickly. They moved quickly on it. It happened on the 4th. Within 48 hours, they had it scripted, recorded, produced, reviewed, authorized, and posted to social media, which is a big thing. I mean, you don't see that happen with government in almost anything, anywhere, at least on the local level. Everything never happens. So we're seeing some pretty big changes there, and I just wanted to call that out. So I think it's directionally right, but are other departments going to follow along? We will see. So while that is happening, of course, there is a lot of pushback about it. Garcia's family is sort of echoing a lot of the same things that I just told you. They're saying that the family says that the officer's story about him, essentially saying, shoot me, or pointing a gun at them, just doesn't match the man that they knew. That wasn't what James Garcia would do. That's not how he would act. And so they're saying, we want all of the body camera stuff, all of the different footage. Officers say that Garcia refused to comply when officers ordered him to drop the gun. He refused, and they say that Garcia told the officers to shoot him as he lifted the gun towards the officers. So that's their story. They're saying that they saw the gun, they said, drop it. He says, shoot me, and pulls a gun up, and they shot him. Phoenix PD only released a small portion of the body cameras after he was shot. Clearly they knew he had a gun on him. Activists and some state representatives are calling for the immediate release of all the body camera footage. State Rep Diego Rodriguez and Senator Martin Quezada are calling on the Phoenix Police Department to release all of the officer body-worn camera footage, and says that releasing the information, which we were all asking for, will not negatively impact the internal investigation in any way, but it would go a long way in establishing a greater level of trust between the community and law enforcement, which I think is a great point, right? I mean, why are all these things always held so close to the chest? This is the problem. This is why people just don't trust their investigations. Okay, we know you have to do an internal investigation, but you're basically investigating yourselves, or you bring in another arm of law enforcement, a different agency, a different department. So Phoenix investigates Scottsdale, and Scottsdale investigates Phoenix, but they're both brothers and sisters in law enforcement. So even though you're bringing an outside agency in, or the FBI in, or whatever it is, why don't you just let us also see it? Why don't you just let us see what you're investigating? Because we may have something to say about it. Do you remember what happened in the Ahmaud Arbery case? Remember what happened when they were investigating themselves? They were investigating the McMichaels, who were former law enforcement, had worked in the prosecutor's office as an investigator, and testified in cases as a former police officer. He shot and killed Ahmaud Arbery, or his son did. He was part of it, part of the entrapment, and part of the basically the kidnapping and all of the felony murder. He was charged with murder. Well, the county attorneys, the district attorneys, they investigated him. They investigated him for 2 months. It went through 3 different county attorneys, and they all had very difficult times finding that there was any evidence of misconduct or malfeasance. They decided that they were not going to prosecute the charges. It wasn't until somebody else leaked that video to the public that we got to see it. We had a little different interpretation of what we saw in that video. And that led to criminal charges. It led to an indictment. New charges were filed. A grand jury heard the case, and they got prosecuted with felony murder. Would that have happened if we had not seen it? So are we just supposed to just trust these same people? Look, I get it. I appreciate that you're going to release what's available, what you can, sooner rather than later. But it's just not good enough, right? We want to see it all. We want to see what you're investigating, and we want to know how you're investigating it. For us to just sit back and say, yeah, you're right, we distrust you, but we do trust you to at least do a good investigation. It doesn't make any sense. We want to see what's going on. We want that transparency. So these 2 representatives from the state of Arizona, I think, are absolutely right. Here are a couple things that they want to point out. The public, and more importantly, James Garcia's family, need the facts. We need to see all of the raw body camera footage, raw civilian video. Did the cops confiscate any other video that we have not seen? Did they round this up? Did they threaten anybody to not post this stuff? Is there any other recordings that have not been accounted for thus far? They want the complete 911 call. They want the description of the suspect they were looking for, radio logs, police reports, prior shooting and complaint histories of the officers involved. All we got was a produced 3-minute video filled with information selectively released by the police to bolster a narrative that is disputed by a witness, which is right, which is the point. So even though the Phoenix Police Department, Jeri Williams, they're all moving directionally right, they're still missing the mark. We want to see more. We want the evidence, because cops showed up and they shot a guy in his car. He did have a gun, but many people have guns. We have guns. I have guns. I have multiple guns in multiple locations, as do many Arizonans. I think most of the country has guns now, if you want to believe the records for gun sales over the last couple months as a result of all of the turmoil in the world. So that by itself is not enough. Just because somebody has a gun doesn't mean that a cop can just start firing rounds off at them. We want to see if he pointed it at anybody, and if the entirety of the shooting and the incident was justified. And so we're going to continue to follow that story. We're going to set some nice deadlines on that one, of course. This is a situation where, okay, so let me check the chat, see if there's any questions here. This is a situation that I think will continue to unfold, and it's not one that I think we're ready to really draw a conclusion on. There are a lot of protesters out there who are very upset about what happened, as am I. Anytime somebody is shot and killed by law enforcement, that is a tragedy. It's not a good thing, and I think there's, in most cases, alternatives to it. It's a mental health problem. It's a drug problem, but it doesn't, it's not, we're in Fallujah in Iraq kicking down walls of terrorist bunkers types of problems. Unfortunately, they are treated that way in many situations. So I just don't think that it's entirely justified. There's going to be a lot of problems if it was the wrong guy. Okay, we saw that already happen in Breonna Taylor's case. Breonna Taylor, they kicked in her boyfriend's door. They had the wrong guy. They already had the guy in custody. So police make these mistakes all the time. If they rolled up on the wrong guy, that's a huge problem. You can't just shoot and kill somebody mistakenly. So we're going to see what happened there, and then we're going to see what else is available, what other body camera recordings can be disclosed, what others will be disclosed, and are they going to disclose it within the timeline, within that their own policy that they dictated to the rest of us that said within 10 to 14 days, are they going to release it, or is it going to be withheld under the guise that it is part of a continuing investigation? We will continue to see. All right, so let's take a look at some comments. So confirmation the audio was good. What's up, Lady Zaga? Good to see you. The Force of User says, I've known for 25 years. Poor police. Did he say come? I'm betting the gun was planted by the cops, which is why they didn't produce the beginning of the footage. That's an interesting observation. I don't think I saw that when his hand was going in. So if that cop's hand, was going in without a gun and he pulled a gun off, I suppose another officer could throw a gun in. I'm not presuming that, but you certainly could jump to that conclusion. Okay, I've seen a video of the witness. They could have just stayed away and waited until he came out of the car. He was always in the car. They shot him pretty much point blank multiple times through his car window. Yeah, that's an observation by Lady Zaga again, and it's a great observation and one that I agree with. I mean, there's a lot of alternatives, but they were just right on top of him. I mean, they were in a position, if you set out to kill somebody, you couldn't be in a better position than where they were at, especially if you got any firearms instructions or anything. I mean, he was basically immobile. His door was closed. He cannot go anywhere. And he's got, a bunch of objects blocking his ability to maneuver a firearm if he wanted to fire back. I mean, he's basically a sitting duck in a car. So we played that video. Cop is not scared to get shot. Okay, a couple other comments. 10 to 14 days is for sure not reasonable. I could doctor in a video in a few hours. Yeah, that comment comes from D. And yeah, and that's true, right? You can make a video. If they have the body camera footage, they could release it immediately if they wanted to. You just upload it, put it on YouTube. I mean, it's really not all that complicated. As soon as the cop goes back to the station, all they got to do is plug their thing into the charger and the port and upload it. They could do that. I understand that they need to do more than that. They need to review it. They need to discuss it. They need to corroborate stories. So they need to, independently interview all of the different officers. They all have to write their reports, and they have to cross-reference them and see how they match or don't match. And really a large part of that is getting everybody's story straight, whether you want to call it that or not. I mean, that's what they're doing. They spend a lot of time, especially on the side of the road. I see it all the time. We've seen it in their body camera footage where there'll be a handful of cops standing out on the side of the road, just kind of musing about, well, what do we charge him with? What did he do? He did this. Well, we can't cite him with that statute because that statute requires X, Y, and Z. But how about this statute? Because it only requires A, B, and C. And they're conversing about how to essentially collude to justify the criminal charges that they're going to try to trump up. So that happens all the time. And certainly some of that 10 to 14 day window may be to give them time to do that. Question comes from whatever's clever. How many days would police need when there's a video of a regular citizen killing a cop for the police to come to a conclusion? The amount of time should be the same when the roles are reversed. Yeah, it's very true, right? If the police are ever threatened, things move very quickly. When the cops are under threat, if somebody kills a cop and is on the loose, have you ever seen what happens there? Have you ever seen that? Find a story about a guy who shoots and kills a cop and then flees, and he's on the loose, right? He's gone. They can't find him. There's like an international manhunt. Every single law enforcement officer who's available jumps on the phones, jumps on the internet. You see like CSI Miami, all these technology boards and maps and Zoom, and they will go and track that person down. And that person, the way the story usually ends up, that person has about 175 bullet holes in them because every single cop is resolved to get their one piece of that. They're very in uniformity on those types of cases, and so they just go very hard to deal with somebody who hurt one of their own. So they can move quickly. We know that. They just don't often want to. Hyena Vaughn, the defund movement means that police do not need a $3 billion. Yeah, $3 billion. Yeah. So we're seeing some of that happen in New York. I think they cut their budget by $1 billion. So a $6 billion budget down to a $5 billion budget. We have somebody here who knew James Garcia. So Mr. The Big Boss 623 says he knows or knew James Garcia. May he rest in peace. Hope you're doing well. So that would be 4 hours and the entire history of the shooter on primetime news with full press conference at Whatever's Clever. Defund means that the police do not get billions in budget funding, build more schools, and so on and so forth. So one final comment. It's horrible what happened, but I don't think defunding the police is right. We need them, but we do need change. And I think that's a pretty reasonable conclusion that comes from Mr. The Big Boss. And so thanks everybody for those nice comments. Today, I want to change the subject now. So we've discussed the local news. We've discussed James Garcia, Phoenix police, what's happening on a lower state level. But now let's talk about the big boys. Let's talk about federal court, federal indictments. And of course, I am talking about the story that's been around for a long time. We're finally seeing some interesting developments. Of course, that is Ghislaine Maxwell. Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. Ghislaine was arrested on July 2nd at a mansion in New Hampshire, and she has been lying low. So a little bit of backstory on this. Of course, Jeffrey Epstein, if you missed this story by some miracle, Jeffrey Epstein is sort of a world-renowned, known or really alleged pedophile, somebody who was trafficking and having sex with underage women, flying them all over the place. He was a multi-billionaire, multiple properties, and really rolled with some of the high rollers in our society, people like the president, people like Bill Clinton, and the prince from the UK, Andrews, I think is his name. I can't recall. But a lot of big names, a lot of big people. And so he was indicted. He gets arrested. He gets brought into on federal charges and then kills himself. So for a long time, we've been wondering, well, what about his partners in crime? Where about everyone else, who helped him along in this conspiracy? And of course, we're talking about Ghislaine Maxwell. And so I actually have the indictment. I want to run through it with you so that you can see specifically what she is being, or what the government is alleging that they're charging her with. What are the crimes specifically? And so let's take a look at it. We'll run through it. Some interesting stuff, some not so interesting stuff. It's pretty pretty much what you would expect, I would think. Let's take a look. So this is the federal indictment, and we're going to see here it was filed, sealed indictment, filed the first count, conspiracy to entice minors to travel to engage in illegal sex act. So basically what they're doing for this entire part is they're laying out some of the facts. And so one of the first things I wanted to talk about was the timing on this thing, right? Jeffrey Epstein and this entire case, it's all recent. This is all happening right now. But a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, it happened in 1994 and 1997. You can see here in this indictment that they're saying really basically everything we're talking about here, minus some perjury charges, happened between 1994 and 1997. So they're very old. And when we're talking about victims who were under the age of 18 at the time, because we're talking about illegal sex acts and sex with children and minors, now they must be pretty old, right? If all this stuff happened between 1994 and 1997, we're talking about people who were probably between 26 and 29 if they were 17 at that time. So if you go back to 1994 and a person was 17, now that person is 26. Or, if they were younger, let's say they were 14, which we're going to see one of the victims, one of the allegations is she was 14, then she's going to be 23. So, you can kind of get a picture of where this is going. Who are these people? There was a Netflix documentary. They may be talking about some of those people who were in there, or these may be other witnesses. We don't really know. And the indictment is not going to tell us. They're not going to tell us who these people are because we want to protect their information. We want to protect their privacy, protect their identity so that they're not dragged through the coals on this thing. Because, of course, there's going to be a lot of people, Alan Dershowitz is one of them, who are going to say there's not enough evidence there to move forward against Ghislaine Maxwell. Now, let me preface that, right? I want to be very clear on this. I don't have any desire to defend Jeffrey Epstein or Ghislaine Maxwell. No desire at all. My understanding from what I've read, I don't know the details of the facts of their case, but from what I do know, there's pretty good evidence that both of these people were human debris, just not good people, taking advantage of young women, trafficking women, taking advantage of other people, blackmailing people, committing some of the most, heinous things that you can do to another person, just really grotesque, really disgusting stuff. And I think there's pretty much a consensus on that. Everybody would agree that from what we've seen, what we've heard, there's kind of enough evidence that we can tell that there's smoke. There's probably a pretty big roaring fire over there. And everybody is kind of abandoning ship. All of Ghislaine's friends, all of Jeffrey Epstein's friends, everybody's just kind of trying to get out of the blast zone. So while we can agree that the consensus is there, you still got to ask yourself, is there enough to convict her in a court of law? That's an entirely different question. And that's what we're talking about on this show. So I'm not defending what they did. I'm not defending anything that Jeffrey Epstein or Ghislaine Maxwell have ever done to anybody. I have a lot of empathy for all of the victims and all of the destruction they've caused over the years, many, many years. But what we're talking about now, can they get convicted? The reason why I want to cover this on Watching the Watchers, I talked about this when we were talking about Jeffrey Epstein. These people in this position with this much wealth, this much power, this much influence, they're almost a pseudo part of the government. They operate at a different level. They get a different set of rules than you or I do. They don't play the same game. We saw this already with Jeffrey Epstein. He got a sweetheart deal on some serious charges where he basically had to serve a year in jail, but was like at a country club most of the time on work release and home detention and all this stuff. Total nonsense. If you or I got charged with those same deals, we would have been destroyed in prison, in life for the rest of our lives, and it would not have been pretty. But because of his power, because of his influence, because of his wealth, he skated away from this thing. And so did Ghislaine for a long time. And so from my perspective, these people are as much part of the problem as bad cops, bad prosecutors, bad judges. This is corruption. This is disgusting, inequitable administration of justice across the board. So we want to call this out. We want to hold them accountable. They totally blew it with Jeffrey Epstein. How did they bring this person into the criminal justice system and then let him kill himself, apparently, right? How did that happen for somebody who had so much public interest. Everybody wanted justice in this case, and they really, really blew that if that's what actually happened. So that's why we're covering the story, in case you had any concern about it. But we want to make sure that the Justice Department is actually doing their job, and that this is not going to be a case where somebody with a lot of power, authority, and influence walks away, because you or I would never get the same benefit of that doubt. Our clients, the people we work with, they never get those benefits. And so I want the equal administration of justice for our clients, for the cops who break the law, for the prosecutors who break the law, for the judges who break the law, and for the rich, powerful elite, these people who are part of this, kind of pseudo oligarchy that manipulate a lot of the things in our country. They need to be held to the same standard. And so that's what we do, of course, on Watching the Watchers. All right, so let's go back to the indictment. We've got most of the people here, actually all of them, are under the age of 18. So one of the victims was as young as 14 years old, which of course is disgusting. And so what this indictment does is goes through a lot of the factual background here. And so you can see that they're going to kind of do a quick introduction, and they're going to talk about the intimate relationship between Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein. So apparently these two, have been in a romantic relationship for a very long time. When I started reading this indictment, one of my initial thoughts was, well, why are we talking about something that happened in 1994 and 1997? This is over 20 years ago. So what's the deal here? Didn't they do anything sooner? Well, I start reading through it, and there's more evidence actually that the reason they're going this far back is because this is the beginning. This is when it all started. So Jeffrey and Ghislaine, they start their relationship, and it turns into this sort of connection between the two, where they are in agreement that they're going to be grooming these young girls, girls, they're not even women yet, to kind of bait them into becoming sex objects and to be trafficked for sex. So it starts in 1994 and 1997, and then it just all unravels. So then we can start assembling the spider web of all the different victims who exist, because one leads to another. And so I think the strategy then from the federal, in federal court with the U.S. attorneys, is that they are going to be starting at the beginning and then unraveling this like a ball of yarn as it continues to progress. So that's what they're talking about here. In 1994, 1997, they start a relationship, and Ghislaine is actually managing his properties. They spend a lot of time together. And then in 1994, this is when the grooming starts. So they actually entice and groomed multiple minor girls to engage in sex acts. And what they do, basically all this is talking about is the progression. They're talking about how it works. And it starts off kind of benign, right? It's Ghislaine, it's Jeffrey. They are in the vicinity of these women. They work for him. They work at a store. They do, they cross paths with them. They're at an event or something like that. And what ends up happening is they start talking about, why don't you come over and we can help you with things. We can help you with school. We can help you, find a job. We can help you. They take them to movies. They take them shopping. And it starts off as this friendly thing. It's just a nice older woman or a nice older man taking somebody under their wing. And that's how it starts. And the reason why it's important for this indictment to lay that out is because we see that as a pattern that emerges as we continue through this. When we start talking about all of the different victims, we're going to see that they follow the same pattern. It starts with shopping, it starts with movies, it starts with school, and then it turns into a massage, and then it turns into sex. And so the indictment actually says that. We go through a grooming process. It starts talking about sex talk. So, when did you first have sex, sexual topics, undressing in front of one another. And then it goes from the massages into the sex. And so if you haven't watched the Netflix documentary yet on this, it's Jeffrey Epstein. They do a pretty good job of, I think, laying out the progression through this process. It starts out benign. We're going to get you a job in Italy. And all you got to do is come over and meet him, make sure he likes you. And then, one thing sort of escalates into another. Then what ends up happening is once they're in the middle of a massage, then Ghislaine or somebody else there would start the sexual contact, and then Jeffrey would take it from there, would take advantage of them, and then take it from there. And then what ended up happening a lot is that a lot of these women started to feel like there was sort of an indebtedness almost, right? They're almost being entrapped, and they're subject to this little prison that Ghislaine and Epstein are building around them, and it turns into this quid pro quo thing where the victims would feel like they're indebted because of all the financial help, because of the travel, because of the trips. And so now they have to continue to perform these sexual maneuvers or these sexual favors. Keep in mind, these girls are 14, 15, younger than 18, 17-year-old girls who are alone. I don't know what happened to their parents. None of that's covered in the indictment. I don't know how they got them to this position, but it becomes this exchange where they have sex with Jeffrey in exchange, and Ghislaine, in exchange for something else, right? And the Netflix series, I've got a lot of kind of issues with how they presented a lot of the information there, but it does a good job explaining that progression. So as that would happen, so the massages, would start. Ghislaine would start the massage. She would bring in one of the minor victims who would participate, and then it would just sort of escalate right into outright sex. So we talk a lot about that, a lot about what that looks like in the actual indictment. And then we talk a lot about things like jurisdiction. So the indictment does a good job of laying out where all of this stuff happens. So you can see what they're trying to do is assemble a timeline so that we can follow it around and we can see what happened. Jurisdiction, location, those types of things are very important because in order to prove a criminal case, you got to know that. You got to know about when it happened. You got to know where it happened. You got to know what happened. You got to know who it happened to and who did it. You have to know those things. And so this is what this indictment is doing. And so we get a little tour. We get a little behind the scenes background look at some of the assets that Jeffrey Epstein actually had. So here are a couple of his properties. This one is a location in New York City. I think that was like $50 million or something like that. All of these are very expensive properties. This was in Florida. This one was in New Mexico. And now these are all in the federal indictment, which is interesting. You don't see a lot of pictures in indictments, but they're showing you, essentially that this guy has just massive compounds, massive resources, unbelievable wealth, unbelievable power and pressure and influence. And so we look at these pictures and we say, how can a 14-year-old girl or 17-year-old girl, or even a full adult, or even powerful people would be around a person like this and be intimidated and be under duress and feel like they have to perform what this person is asking them to perform. And so I think they're very illustrative, not particularly necessary, but they certainly help. And then we get actually to the victims. So as I mentioned, right, they're not going to name these victims. So we have them as minor victim 1, minor victim 2, minor victim 3. The first victim was 14 years old when this all started. Under the age of 18 the entire time. She was groomed. She went, again, remember the pattern I was talking about? Shopping, movies, school. Within 1 year of that grooming, they began sexually abusing this young girl. So it took 1 year. So it goes shopping, movies, school, massage, sex. And then that person is locked up. Basically, they have her tied for a while, and this is going to continue on for a number of years. We got a couple different states where this stuff is happening. So the victim number 1, it took place in Florida and New York. She was flying back and forth. There was group sexualized massages taking place. Victim number 2, she's under the age of 18. We don't know how old she is, but she is under the age of 18. This all started in 1996. She was flown into New Mexico in that New Mexico compound. The same deal, right? Starts with movies, shopping, school, same MO. And the reason why the second victim is important is because now you have that pattern. Now you can say, okay, there's the grooming. We thought maybe this was just a one-off situation where Jeffrey mistakes that somebody's underage and they're having a massage and things get heated and, people just explode with passion and something happens and they're all, having an orgy or something like that, right? If that thing happens. But my point is that, this is something, now we see a pattern taking place. So now it's not just a random sexual fling. This is something that is systematized. It's systemic. It's organized in a way that they are running a system. They're running a little pipeline. And as I mentioned, this was happening in 1994 to 1997. So they're just getting good at it, right? They're just starting to build this ring out of these women that they're going to be sex trafficking. And so this is their MO. This is their modus operandi, and this is how they work. We continue on. There were other unsolicited massages and then it turns into sex, of course. So the second makes it a pattern. Number 3 happens in London. So he had a London place as well. Again, she's under 18, 1994 to 1995. Again, multiple interactions. They don't go into detail about this, but I'm going to be presuming that, of course, it is the same MO: shopping, movies, school, job, promises, and then unsolicited massages, and then sex. So as this is all going on, the indictment is also saying that while they were investigating Jeffrey Epstein, while they were working through this case, Ghislaine was not being honest at all. She was actually trying to conceal her conduct. So they go into some detail about this in bullet point 8. They talk a lot about a conspiracy, whether or not, whether she was doing this by herself or whether there was actually basically an illegal conspiracy that was taking place between her and Jeffrey Epstein. And we're going to get into that a little bit further, but they are detailing that this was essentially a conspiracy. There were some things that she did on her own. There were some things that she did with Jeffrey Epstein. And so she's culpable for both. She's going to have criminal liability for doing the stuff that she did by herself and for the stuff that Jeffrey did. So we talk about these things called overt acts. So you see this here, overt acts. What are the overt acts? They're going to talk about some of the different places where this happened. So New York, Florida, New Mexico, London. So back in 1994, 1997, this guy was doing this everywhere, all over the world. So all of these different locations, the law was broken there. So they may have some claims. There are things that they can do in their respective governments. This is being brought in the District of New York because a lot of this happened in New York. He had a residence in New York. So the indictment is taking a little bit of time to set that up. Count 2 is enticement of a minor to travel to engage in illegal sex act. So again, this is the first one was a conspiracy between Jeffrey and Ghislaine. This one, count 2, is saying you specifically, Ghislaine, you enticed a minor to travel to engage in illegal sex conduct. And so you acted alone here over the 3 years, and they're going to charge her, account for that. Count number 3 is the actual transportation. So the first one, right, there's a conspiracy. The second one is that you specifically, transported. And then now there's also another conspiracy to transport. So there was an original conspiracy. There was you specifically transported, but then you conspired with Jeffrey Epstein to transport these women. And it's kind of the same thing. They're really looking for every single charge that they can throw at her, and rightfully so. The actual transportation took place, and it was done for sex. The indictment goes through, talks about some of these acts in furtherance. So when you're talking about a conspiracy charge, there needs to be an overt act. So just because you and a friend say, hey, it might be a good idea to rob that bank, that in some jurisdictions, in some states, that might be a conspiracy. You don't need an overt act. You don't need to actually get a gun and a face mask and plans for the bank, and you don't need to run in there and start robbing the bank in order for it to be a conspiracy. Just the fact that you made that agreement is enough. But here what we're talking about is an overt act. So what did they do to actually support that conspiracy? Maybe they talked about transporting these women or enticing these women or whatever, but they took some overt acts, meaning they did something very substantive, very concrete that brought this forward. And that's what this indictment is going through here. It's just saying that they enticed them to travel. They actually did travel, unsolicited massages, more massages, all sort of that would lead up into this sexual activity. There was actual transportation that took place. So Ghislaine did knowingly transport somebody under the age of 18 from Florida to New York. Count number 5. These are all the perjury counts. So they're saying that there were some original allegations that stem back to 1994, 1997. But there are new charges that stem from lying under oath during some civil lawsuit proceedings. So as this stuff was heating up and escalating, people started suing Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein civilly. So because they were out of the criminal court because they had made their deal, people can still sue them civilly. And so during these civil lawsuits, and you see a lot of these depositions take place in the actual Netflix documentary, you're going to see that they're answering questions. We've got Jeffrey Epstein, who's on camera answering questions as a part of this lawsuit. Now, he invokes his rights and doesn't answer much, but you get to see him, right? And so during one of those interviews, Ghislaine is being asked some questions, and here is what she is asked. Did Jeffrey Epstein have a scheme to recruit underage girls for sexual massages? If you know. I don't know what you're talking about. Probably a lie. List all the people under the age of 18 that you interacted with at any of Jeffrey's properties. I'm not aware of anybody that I interacted with other than obviously the plaintiff, who was 17 at this point. So I'm going to guess that's clearly, right, a lie. I'm not aware of anybody that I interacted with who was 17 at this point. I'm sure there's other people who are under that age. And all they would need to do is basically find somebody who was underage that there's clear evidence that she interacted with that she should remember, and then boom, now she's lying. This is why you don't talk under oath, or you don't talk to people if you can avoid it, especially in legal proceedings, because you can lie without even knowing you're lying, and then they can charge you with perjury for that. Count 6, same stuff. Were you aware of the presence of sex toys or devices used in sexual activities in Mr. Epstein's Palm Beach house? No, not that I can recall. Do you know whether Mr. Epstein possessed sex toys or devices used in sex activities? No. Other than yourself and the blonde and the brunette, have you identified as having been involved in a three-way sexual activities with whom? I wasn't aware that he was having sexual activities with anyone when I was with him other than myself. That is my testimony. That is correct. Is it your testimony that you've never given anybody a massage? I have not given anyone a massage, she says. That is my testimony. I never gave minor victim 2 a massage, right? So that's it. That is the federal indictment. So she's got a bunch of counts of trafficking and sex crimes with minors, and then she's got 2 different perjury charges that probably going to be pretty easy to prove too. They've got sworn statements from these victims. They presented all this material to a grand jury, it looks like, and she was indicted. So the evidence that they presented was strong enough that they decided to move forward with the grand jury, indicted her. She was picked up and arrested. And so that's the background, right? That's why she got charged. Very old charges. Some new, some from 2016 for the perjury charges, but the main ones, the meaty ones, the ones that, we're interested in, that Jeffrey Epstein was really involved in, those happened over 20 years ago, in 1994 to 1997. Now, that may just be the tip of the iceberg, as I explained. There may be this unraveling of this web of information that comes out over the coming months. The prosecutor's office may already have it all, because if you remember, after Jeffrey Epstein was arrested, they raided everything. They have everything. They have his hard drives. They have, I think they broke into a safe. They found thousands of pictures of underage women. My guess is that there's probably some pretty good evidence in there about what Ghislaine was into, whether, specifically about those perjury charges. Maybe she's holding some sex toys, or maybe there's some information in there that she's got, and we can now see it. So she's clearly lying about those things. The other charges are going to be a little bit more interesting. But can we all agree that while she's in custody, that it's probably a good idea to keep her alive? Can we keep her alive this time? We have a second shot on this case. Guys, can we please keep her alive? All right, so Maxwell's every move will be monitored behind bars after the jail cell death of Jeffrey Epstein. So Maxwell was transferred to New York's Metropolitan Detention Center. Before her court hearing, Epstein was arrested by the same U.S. Attorney's Office, but he killed himself before he faced justice on the charges of sex trafficking. He killed himself. Okay, Maxwell will be guarded by the highest security available while behind bars, so she doesn't also commit suicide or get jumped by other inmates and killed. Or, Jason Bourne or whoever somebody has suiting up right now to go take her out, hopefully they'll lock this thing up a little bit more. Remember in Jeffrey Epstein's case, remember everything went bad? Remember this? He was already on suicide watch. They took him off suicide watch. The cameras broke down. The guards were asleep. He had broken bones in his neck. All of those things. I'm not one to jump into conspiracy theories, but But I got some questions about that case. Hopefully that doesn't happen here. Ghislaine's next court date, her arraignment, is going to be scheduled on July 14th, so that's next week. Multiple charges, 6 counts of different charges. Judge Allison Nathan in Manhattan Federal Court said a bail hearing will be held on July 14th, 1 p.m. via video conference. So her lawyer and a prosecutor will appear on the phone on video, but the others can access the audio of the hearing by telephone. And of course, Ghislaine faces up to 35 years in prison. Now look where she was. Look where she was at. It's a beautiful home over in New Hampshire. From New Hampshire mansion to the Metro Detention Center in New York City. So a little bit different, little change of environment for her, but it will be curious to see where this goes and what happens. What happens at an arraignment, it's usually very, very basic, very preliminary. An arraignment is where there's a formal reading of the charges against the person who's been accused. So in Ghislaine's case, I already went through the indictment, but it's essentially a little bit kind of a formal reading of what those charges are. So they're going to say 2 counts of perjury, 2 counts of conspiracy, 1 count of transporting a minor. All of those different charges will be read. Their attorney's going to probably make a bunch of arguments as to why she should be released from custody. So at an arraignment, what they'll do is they'll set a bunch of different release conditions. They'll say, we'll release you provided that you post a $100,000 bond, or we'll release you without any bond. We'll just, as long as you promise to come back, we trust you. We don't think you're a flight risk. You're not going to go anywhere. So we'll let you go out on your own. Is that going to happen in Ghislaine's case? I'm going to guess the answer is a hard no on that one, because she is a massive flight risk. She's already been kind of evading authorities for a long time. She's got a ton of money, a ton of resources, and I really don't think that the judge is going to grant bail in this case. I think she's going to be sitting in there for a while, which is why it's so important that we make sure that she doesn't off herself or get killed by somebody. Because there's a lot at stake. I know there are a lot of people who had a lot of damage done by Ghislaine and by Jeffrey Epstein, and of course they deserve justice. So we'll continue to follow that along. Now, if you didn't watch the Netflix series, then some of this may not make a whole lot of sense, but in that series, they talk about Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer. This guy's name is Alan Dershowitz. Alan Dershowitz is one of the most renowned criminal defense lawyers in the country, if not the world. Very, very reputable, very, very good at what he does. Works on a lot of high-level cases. And there were allegations in the actual documentary that he, the defense lawyer, was a part of this entire ring. So that Alan Dershowitz was actually sleeping with some of these victims, and he was involved in Jeffrey Epstein's entire ring, right? So this is a guy who's a very reputable, he's been doing it a long time. I believe him, in the things that he says, because he's been doing it for so long and he's got really no ulterior motive, but very serious allegations. So when I was watching the documentary and they're like, Alan slept with me like 6, 7 times. Whoa, that is a big claim, because this guy is a legal powerhouse, and you can't just make those types of claims without any other evidence or any backing. And so when Ghislaine, so Alan Dershowitz, for ever since this documentary came out, has kind of been getting a lot of flack for this, right? People are watching it and they're believing it, even though there's a lot of evidence to the contrary, which I'm going to share with you in a minute. But he's been under a lot of fire for this, and he's even claimed that he's going to be suing Netflix and a lot of these victims who are claiming that he was part of this for things like defamation. And he may have a pretty good claim on some of those things. But when Ghislaine was arrested, he wrote a letter that kind of flips that entire documentary on its head. So when you watch the documentary, you're going to see that it is very, very, very one-sided, as it should be, right? I mean, it's a documentary about how kind of disgusting this whole thing was, and how terrible of a person this guy was, and how much damage he caused. But there is some area that I think if you're not truthful, it undermines the entire series, and they did that with this Alan Dershowitz piece, in my opinion. So they kind of skewer him a little bit. He says, when he goes on camera, and he says specifically, if there's evidence, prove it. I'm open to discussing it on the show, and he's very forceful in his denial of ever sleeping or ever being involved in anything that Jeffrey Epstein was doing. They air it, and they continue on with the series. They don't pay him much mind. So then Ghislaine gets arrested, and Alan, he fires off a pretty good letter, actually. He goes through and he details why this is such a problematic case. And so let's dive into his statement. Like every other arrested person, she must be presumed innocent, is what he says. Now, this is a picture from the documentary itself. If you haven't checked it out on Netflix and you're interested in Jeffrey Epstein, you can go check it out. A lot of sad stuff that takes place there, a lot of interesting things, but it's worth a watch. But it is definitely taking a position. So just watch it through that lens, and I think you'll be okay. So here's what he says about it, right? He never saw her do anything inappropriate. He only knew her as Jeffrey Epstein's 30-something-year-old girlfriend, or 30-something girlfriend. Don't believe Netflix based on accounts of two women with histories of making dubious accusations. So there are these two women. One, her name is Virginia. The other one's name is Sarah. Sarah Roberts admits she was pressured to falsely accuse Dershowitz by her lawyers. And then Sarah claimed to have sex tapes on Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump. And then she admitted to inventing the story. So the documentary, it brings these women in who seem to be very credible. They don't talk about any of these other things, about admitting that they lied about it, or about making up stories about sex tapes for Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton. So we're dealing with some people in the documentary who are not the most credible of witnesses. They've got some problems with their testimony and with the things that they're claiming happened. And so basically that's what Alan Dershowitz is saying. He's saying, look, keep an open mind until after a full trial. He brings up some other pretty good arguments too. So remember what I said. This whole story is over 20 years old. It's very old. So there are things called a statute of limitations, which means that if you don't bring a criminal charge soon enough, you lose the right to do that. So in other words, you can't get a DUI and then have charges filed for that DUI 20 years from now. It's too far. In Arizona, the rule is they got to bring that within 1 year. If you get stopped for a DUI, those charges have to be filed, and your case needs to get moving within 12 months. They can't wait longer than that. If they do, they lose it. The government has to have the incentive to bring charges and bring them quickly. Because as I said, justice delayed is justice denied. You need to have your day in court. Well, in Ghislaine's case, the case is 20-something years old. So what is the statute of limitations? Is there an argument maybe that the case should be thrown out because they didn't bring it soon enough? It's too old. That would apply, of course, to the sex charges, not to the perjury charges. But that sounds like it's going to be an argument that Alan Dershowitz is going to be making. Also, if you don't recall, Jeffrey Epstein got a sweetheart deal a while ago. I think it was back during the Obama administration. There was a deal between a U.S. district attorney and for these charges that I already mentioned previously on this show, where Jeffrey Epstein got a very, very sweetheart deal. So he gets that deal. In that plea deal, there was an immunity clause, essentially saying that this resolves everything. This one deal solves everything. You can't bring any other charges against me. You can't go after any of my assets. You can't bring new claims. You can't even investigate anybody who was involved with me. And Ghislaine Maxwell's on that list. So is she going to be granted immunity pursuant to that original plea deal? That's very likely something else that he is going to be bringing up in his defense, in his representation. So what else? I mean, what is he just going to sit there and just allow sort of these claims to go against him, saying that he was having sex with all these people? The answer is no. He's going to be suing Netflix for it. He is suing Netflix, or he will be suing Netflix, including a claim by Virginia Roberts that Jeffrey Epstein trafficked her to Dershowitz and had her have sex with him. It's a total lie, he says. I never met her. I never saw her. I never heard of her, and said he has travel records to prove it, which was an interesting thing. You know, he does have travel records. Here's a couple tweets from him. So he says that it's basically a lie. My wife and daughter were with me the one time I flew to the island, years before she met Epstein and years before he was suspected of wrongdoing. Show me a flight log that has me going to the island without my wife. You can't, because there isn't any. I never went to the island without my wife, and I can prove it, so stop lying, is what he says, which is, it's just pretty good evidence. There are a lot of flight logs. Many of those flight logs have documented names on there. If you watch the documentary, Bill Clinton's name's on there many, many times. And he claims that he had never been to the island, right? So who knows what the integrity of those logs are? Who knows, you know, if one of them's lying and the other one's not? But My vote typically will go to Alan Dershowitz. I think he's a pretty reputable guy. He says, I hope Epstein made videos. I hope Epstein made videos. There have been suggestions that Epstein made secret videos of all the men who had sex in his houses and planes. I hope he did, and they are all revealed because they will prove I am not among them. I hereby waive my right of privacy in the Epstein videos. So he hopes that they made videos. I kind of hope they made some videos. I'd be very curious to see who else was caught up in this ring of corruption. What about you? Anybody else have any desire to have any videos? Who else wants to know who was involved with this stuff? All right, let's go back to the comments. And see who else is here. So we got a couple other comments here. Joe Martin says, good job. Jim Walker says, cool. Apex Law says, how are you? Doing well, man. Thanks for joining the show. Excellent Arizona attorney. The above attorney is a good guy who likes to help the public. That's true. Thank you, Apex Law. I appreciate that. We do a good job. We try to help as many people as we can. And a couple other comments. Olive says, oh my God, is it a pre-hearing? Yeah. So the arraignment, yeah, I mean, it's part of the pre-trial process. It's really the first court date in almost any case. The judge just wants to make sure that you've got counsel, that your release conditions are set, that you know what the charges are, that you can ask any questions. If there's any special accommodations that need to be made, like, special medications or things, all of that stuff kind of gets settled at that initial court date. And then what the court will also do is schedule a bunch of other hearings. So they'll schedule, more pre-trial proceedings, more status conferences, whatever needs to happen in the case. So very, very basic. One of the things that I think is going to be addressed is whether she can be released or not. And as I mentioned previously, I don't think she's going anywhere. She is being locked up for quite some time. So that's it. That's what I got for the show for you today. Let me give you a quick reminder. If you have not already, check out my new book. It's called Beginning to Winning: How to Succeed, How to Fight Your Case in the Criminal Justice System, and How to Win, How to Succeed. It's available on Amazon. If you are if somebody who's been charged with a crime, the book is going to be applicable to you. If you're not, you don't need to go buy it. But what I would ask, if you want to support the show and help us out, I would love a subscribe, but really more importantly, I would love a share. So if you know somebody who's also interested in these topics, if they're interested in criminal justice reform, if they're interested in news, if they're interested in criminal law, just in general, this is the show. This is the place to be. We want to help build our audience and get the message out there more and really kind of carry the conversation on. It's more fun when we have more people involved. It's more interesting. We get more ideas cooking. It's kind of like a little pressure cooker of ideas and thoughts, of opinions. And it's fun. It keeps the show energetic and moving forward. So share it somewhere. Share it on Facebook. If you're on Twitter, follow me at Robert Gruler ESQ, which is short for Esquire, at Robert Gruler ESQ. Check me out over there. Show's on my profile. Just give me a retweet. Share it on Facebook. Do one of those things. That'd be huge. Submit it on Reddit. Whatever you want to do. Sharing is caring, as they say. So I want to thank everybody for tuning in. We will be here again, same time, same location next week. We're going to see what happens between now and then. Hopefully we don't have any more police shootings, no other people killed that we have to talk about, but I'm not going to hold my breath. But we'll say our prayers. Everybody stay safe out there, stay healthy, and I will see you on the next one. Have a good night.